I remember the first time I discovered how quiet the world could become when I swallowed a pill. It wasn't silence exactly, more like a soft blur over everything sharp and unbearable. The chaos of my thoughts slowed down, the memories dulled, and for a few precious hours, I didn't have to feel. Painkillers, they called them. But for me, they were more than that. They were escape routes. My childhood had been a battlefield, nights spent alone in the dark waiting for a mother who never returned, days haunted by a father who disappeared before I even knew the sound of his voice. Hunger gnawed at me, not just in my stomach, but in my chest, a desperate craving for safety, for love. I grew up in small foster homes across Ohio, each one colder than the last. By the time I turned 18, I had already learned people leave, but pain never does. So when a doctor handed me that first prescription after a minor accident, I didn't just take the pills, I clung to them. They didn't just numb my body. They numbed the memories. They numbed the aching loneliness that had followed me since childhood. Soon, I wasn't taking them for physical pain anymore. I was taking them to survive myself. But the more I leaned on them, the more I lost pieces of who I was. My job slipped. Friendships faded. Even my reflection betrayed me. Pale skin, hollow eyes, a stranger staring back. Yet, I told myself I was fine. I had to be, because if anyone knew the truth, if anyone saw the depth of my dependence, I feared they'd walk away too, and I couldn't bear another abandonment. What I didn't know was that my unraveling life was about to intersect with someone else's story, someone who carried his own scars, a widower who refused to let despair win, who believed in a love bigger than grief. And in the wreckage of my addiction, he would become the one person willing to fight for me, even when I had given up on myself. There's a strange kind of rhythm to addiction. Wake up, search for the bottle, swallow the pills, wait for the fog to roll in, work just enough to stay unnoticed, smile just enough to seem normal, and lie just enough to keep suspicion away. That was my life at 34 in Columbus, Ohio, a cycle that looked ordinary from the outside but was crumbling inside. Most days I went through the motions, showing up at the small insurance office where I worked, answering calls, processing paperwork, and praying no one noticed how often I slipped to the bathroom just to breathe. I kept my head down, my voice even, and my heart locked behind walls. The pills weren't pleasure anymore, they were survival. I couldn't remember what it felt like to simply be without them. But everything has a breaking point. Mine came the day I almost collapsed at work. Dizziness overwhelming me, the floor tilting under my feet. I told everyone it was the flu, but deep down I knew it was the beginning of the unraveling. Something inside me whispered that the life I was clutching so tightly was already slipping away. I ignored it. I wasn't ready to face what came next. And yet, life has a way of placing people in your path when you least expect it. A man would soon enter my story, carrying his own kind of loss, his own quiet grief. I didn't know it then, but he would see through the fog I lived in. He would notice what others didn't, and instead of turning away, he would stay, and his presence would begin to undo years of silence in me. Before we step into that part of my journey, let me ask you something. If you've ever felt trapped in a psycho, whether addiction, grief, or fear, this story might speak to you. Please subscribe, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, where are you watching from your city and country, and which part of this story so far resonates with you the most? Mornings were the hardest. I would wake up in my small one-bedroom apartment, blinds pulled tight against the Ohio sun, my throat dry, my heart racing before the day even began. The first thought wasn't about breakfast or work or even the weather, it was about the pills. My hand would instinctively reach for the nightstand, searching for that orange bottle. Only after swallowing 2 or 3 could I breathe normally. It wasn't relief, not really. It was survival, disguised as calm. My coworkers thought I was quiet by nature, someone who preferred numbers and paperwork over conversation. In truth, I avoided people because they asked too many questions. How was your weekend? Are you seeing anyone? You seem tired. Are you okay? Those innocent words cut too close to the truth. I had no answer that didn't feel like a lie, so I learned to smile, nod, and keep my distance. The pills dulled not only the pain but also the color of everything. Food had no taste. Music felt like static. Even laughter, when I forced it, sounded hollow, like it belonged to someone else. Yet, without the pills, the memories came roaring back. Nights when my foster parents locked me in my room for hours. Days when other children were picked up after school while I sat waiting, forgotten. I had convinced myself long ago that numbness was better than the sharp sting of remembering. It was a cold Tuesday evening when I realized something had to change. I had taken more than usual that day, desperate to silence the gnawing restlessness inside me. On my drive home, headlights blurred into streaks of white, the road swayed, and for a split second I lost control of the wheel. My car jerked back into the lane, but the fear lingered in my chest. I could have killed someone. I could have killed myself. Yet, even that thought didn't stop me from taking more once I got home. That night, lying on my couch with the empty pill bottle in my hand, I whispered words I hadn't spoken in years. God, if you're real, help me. My voice trembled, and I felt ridiculous. I hadn't prayed since I was a child, back when I thought prayers were magic spells that could bring back parents who never returned. But something in me cracked open that night, a small, fragile plea escaping from the ruins of my silence. The following days blurred together, but something shifted. I started noticing things I hadn't before. The way sunlight painted golden lines across my desk at work, the sound of children laughing outside my apartment window, the warmth of a cashier's smile at the grocery store. It was as if my prayer, though small and uncertain, had awakened a sliver of awareness. I was still taking the pills, but for the first time, I wondered if life could look different. And then he appeared. His name was Daniel, a man in his 40s with kind eyes and a quiet strength about him. He came into the office one Friday afternoon to update his insurance policy. I was the one assigned to help him. He wore a simple wedding band on a chain around his neck, and though I didn't ask, something in his expression told me there was a story behind it. I couldn't explain why, but I felt exposed under his gaze, as if he could see past my practiced smiles. "You look tired," he said softly, not unkindly. It startled me because most people avoided direct comments. I forced a laugh, brushing it off, but something about his voice stayed with me after he left. It wasn't judgmental. It wasn't casual. It was concerned. And concern was something I hadn't felt directed at me in years. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. Not because of attraction, at least, not then, but because he had noticed. In a world where I had worked so hard to disappear, a stranger had looked me in the eye and spoken truth. It stirred something fragile inside me, something that wanted to be seen but was terrified of exposure. I didn't know it yet, but Daniel would become the first person to challenge the fortress I had built around myself. His own story of loss and faith would intertwine with mine in ways I couldn't have imagined. And though I didn't realize it then, the prayer I whispered into the darkness had already set things in motion. The next time Daniel appeared at the office, I nearly jumped out of my chair. It had only been a week since our brief interaction, but something about his presence unsettled me. He wasn't loud or demanding, quite the opposite. He walked in with a calmness that filled the room, as if the air itself slowed around him. His paperwork had some minor error, so he'd been called back. Part of me wondered if it was coincidence, or if God had answered my whispered prayer in a way I wasn't prepared to recognize. I tried to keep the exchange strictly professional. Smiles, forms, signatures. But Daniel didn't rush. He lingered, asking about my day, about the office. His eyes lingered on me longer than most people's did, not in a way that felt invasive, but searching, almost as if he could sense the storm behind my practiced calm. For a moment, I felt like a fraud, terrified he might see the truth, that beneath my blouse and cardigan and neatly combed hair, I was held together by pills and silence. When I handed him his corrected forms, I noticed the chain around his neck again. The ring glinted in the fluorescent light, worn smooth from years of touch. He must have caught me looking, because he smiled sadly. "My wife's," he said simply. His voice didn't crack, but the weight of those two words pressed heavy in the space between us. I hesitated, unsure if I should ask, but the words slipped out. "What happened?" My voice sounded small, almost childlike. He didn't seem surprised by the question. "Cancer. 3 years ago." His gaze drifted for a moment, far away. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room with just a laugh. I thought I'd never breathe again when she left. I swallowed hard, feeling a lump in my throat. Loss was a language I understood, though mine came long before death abandonment that had carved emptiness inside me. Hearing him speak with such honesty and composure felt disarming. I had spent years burying my pain under layers of chemicals and silence. He, somehow, had survived his without hiding, or maybe he had found a different way to cope, one I couldn't yet imagine. Later that evening, at home, I stared at my pill bottle with trembling hands. His words echoed in my mind. I thought I'd never breathe again. I twisted the cap open, poured out 2 pills, and stared at them. Daniel had lost someone he loved deeply, yet he still carried himself with quiet strength. Meanwhile, I was losing myself every day to something I couldn't admit out loud. The shame burned hot, but the fear of feeling without the pills burned hotter. I swallowed them down. A few nights later, I nearly didn't wake up. I had taken too many, chasing that numb calm after a day of rising anxiety. My chest felt heavy, breaths shallow, the room spinning around me. Lying there in the dark, I thought briefly that this might be it, that my story would end in silence, unnoticed, like it had begun. But somewhere deep inside, that fragile plea returned. "God, help me." My voice never reached the air, but it pulsed in my heart. The next morning, I forced myself to the office, pale and hollow-eyed. I expected no one to notice. But when Daniel walked in again, another paperwork issue, another chance encounter, his eyes went straight to mine. He paused, brows furrowing. "You don't look well," he said gently. I brushed it off, mumbling something about not sleeping, but the truth clawed at me. Someone had noticed. He had noticed. Before he left, Daniel leaned slightly closer, his voice low but steady. "You know, pain doesn't have to be carried alone." I froze, unable to respond. No one had ever said that to me before, not in a way that felt genuine. Most people avoided pain, pretended it didn't exist. He didn't. He named it. And then, without pushing further, He simply offered me a kind smile and walked away. That night, I sat in my apartment replaying his words. Pain doesn't have to be carried alone. It was both terrifying and comforting. Terrifying because letting someone in meant risking rejection. Comforting because, for the first time in years, the idea of being seen didn't feel like a threat, it felt like a lifeline. I didn't know it yet, but Daniel had just planted a seed in the ashes of my numb existence, a seed that would slowly push through the cracks of my brokenness and reach for light. By the time autumn settled over Columbus, the leaves turning gold and brittle, I was unraveling faster than I could hide. The pills were slipping through my fingers, bottles emptying quicker, refills harder to justify. At work, I caught my reflection in the glass door one morning, sunken cheeks, eyes rimmed with Fedigund for the first time. I wondered if everyone else saw the truth I was trying so desperately to bury. My worst fear came closer than ever one Thursday afternoon. I was hunched over my desk, shaking as withdrawal gnawed at me, when a coworker named Amanda stopped by with a stack of files. Her eyes flicked to my trembling hands, then to the orange bottle half hidden under a notepad. She said nothing, but the silence between us screamed louder than words. I shoved the bottle into my drawer, heat rushing to my face. The look she gave me, concern mixed with suspicion, burned into my chest. The panic followed me out of the office. I drove aimlessly through the streets, clutching the steering wheel as if it could anchor me. My vision blurred, not from the road but from the storm building inside. Shame, fear, the gnawing need for just one more pill to make it all fade. I ended up parked outside my apartment, sobbing into my hands, my body shaking uncontrollably. That evening, I gave in again. More pills than usual, more than my body could handle. I told myself it was just to sleep, just to stop the noise. But somewhere deep down, I knew I was chasing oblivion. The room spun, my skin clammy, heart pounding erratically. I stumbled toward the door, desperate for air, and collapsed on the sidewalk just as someone called my name. Through the haze, I saw Daniel's face leaning over me, his hands steady, his voice calm. "Stay with me," he urged, his palm gripping mine. Panic flared in his eyes, but beneath it was something stressful. I wanted to tell him to go, to leave me to my wreckage, but my lips refused to form words. Darkness tugged at the edges of my vision, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was in a hospital bed. The sterile smell, the steady beep of monitors, the 4-needle in my arm, it all felt like a judgment I couldn't escape. My chest tightened with dread. I had always feared this moment, my secret spilling into the light, strangers labeling me, condemning me. But then I turned my head and saw him, Daniel, sitting in a stiff plastic chair, exhaustion etched across his face, his eyes fixed on me with something I hadn't felt in years, unwavering presence. "You scared me," he said softly when he noticed I was awake. No anger, no lecture, just those 3 words. Tears stung my eyes, and I looked away, ashamed. I didn't mean my voice cracked, the truth choking me. I can't stop. The confession slipped out, fragile and broken. My hands gripped the sheets as if I might fall apart if I let go. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his voice low but steady. "You don't have to explain it all right now. Just know this, you're not alone." I shook my head violently. "Yes, I am." Everyone leaves. The words burst out before I could stop them. His eyes softened. "I lost my wife. I know what it feels like when the world empties out, but I also know we don't heal by hiding." My body trembled as he reached for my hand. He didn't push, didn't preach. He just held it steady and warm, as if he believed I was worth holding on to. Then, barely above a whisper, I heard him murmur something I couldn't fully catch, only fragments. Give her strength, guide her through. A prayer. Quiet, simple, not meant for me to hear, but I did. And something inside me cracked, not in despair this time, but in longing. That night, lying in the hospital bed with Daniel beside me, I felt the weight of years pressing against a door I had kept locked tight. And for the first time, the door shifted, just enough for light to slip through. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't know if I could fight the cravings or face the memories that haunted me. But I knew this: someone had stayed. And that simple fact felt like a miracle. Recovery wasn't a straight line. It was jagged, messy, and brutal. After the hospital, I promised myself I would cut back, that I would somehow manage without letting anyone know. But the cravings clawed at me like wild animals. My body ached, my hands trembled, and nights became battlegrounds where I lay awake, drenched in sweat, staring at the ceiling while every memory of my childhood came alive like ghosts in the dark. The pills still whispered to me. They sat on the bathroom counter, calling my name with the promise of relief. Sometimes I gave in. Sometimes I didn't. Each day felt like a war one couldn't win. And yet, almost without fail, Daniel showed up. A phone call, a text, a knock on my door with takeout containers in his hands. His presence was steady, as if he had decided I was worth fighting for, even when I hadn't decided it myself. One afternoon, after a particularly brutal night of withdrawal, I broke down in front of him. My body shaking, tears streaming, I blurted out pieces of the past I had kept buried for decades. How my mother disappeared for days, leaving me to fend for myself with empty cupboards. How foster homes blurred together, none of them safe. How abandonment became my shadow, whispering that I was unworthy of being loved. Daniel didn't interrupt. He didn't try to fix it. He just listened, his eyes steady, his hand resting gently over mine. "You didn't deserve any of that," he said finally, his voice thick with emotion. The words landed deep, echoing in the hollow places inside me. No one had ever spoken them to me before. I had always believed the opposite, that everything that happened proved I wasn't enough. Later that week, when the cravings surged again, Daniel suggested something unexpected. "Come with me," he said one evening, without explanation. I hesitated, suspicious, but followed. He drove us across town, stopping in front of a small brick church. My chest tightened immediately. "I don't belong here," I whispered, panic rising. Memories of forced Sunday schools and empty prayers flooded me. "It's not about belonging," Daniel replied. "Sometimes it helps to just sit in a quiet place. No one has to know why you're here. No one will ask anything of you." His voice was calm, reassuring. Against my instincts, I followed him inside. The sanctuary was dim, filled with soft light filtering through stained glass. Empty pews stretched in silence, the air cool and still. We sat in the back, the silence wrapping around us like a blanket. My heart pounded, my skin prickling with unease, but slowly, something inside me shifted. It wasn't about religion, not yet. It was about stillness, about being in a place where I didn't have to perform or pretend. My eyes drifted upward, catching the faint glow of colored light on the walls, and for a moment I felt peace. Fragile, fleeting, but real. Daniel bowed his head, his lips moving silently. I didn't copy him. I didn't even close my eyes. But I watched, curious. wondering what it would feel like to speak words not into the void, but into something that might actually listen. My chest tightened with longing, though I didn't dare admit it aloud. When we left, Daniel didn't ask me if I had prayed. He didn't pressure me, didn't lecture. He simply smiled as we stepped into the evening air. Sometimes the quiet speaks louder than words, he said. I carried that sentence with me the rest of the night, replaying it until it rooted deep inside me. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a different kind of future, one not built on numbness, but on something stronger. I wasn't there yet. I was still fighting, still failing, still breaking, but I was also beginning to hope, and hope, fragile as it was, felt like the first real taste of freedom. Winter settled over the city like a heavy blanket. Nights grew longer, the cold seeping into my bones, and with it came the cravings, sharper than ever. I was tired of fighting, tired of pretending I had control. One evening, alone in my apartment, I stared at the pill bottle in my hand. My body screamed for it, my mind begged for relief. It felt like the only way to silence the chaos. I twisted the cap, my fingers trembling. This time felt different, dangerous. My chest tightened with dread as I realized I was standing at a crossroads. Take the pills and risk disappearing forever, or reach for something else, something untested. My eyes blurred with tears. For the first time, I admitted the truth to myself. I don't want to die, but I don't know how to live. In a moment of desperation, my hand moved not to the pills, but to my phone. Before I could second-guess myself, I dialed Daniel's number. My voice cracked when he answered. I can't do this. Please, help me. Silence followed for half a second, then his voice came steady and strong. I'm on my way. 15 minutes later, he was at my door, breathless from the cold night air. He found me on the floor, clutching the bottle, shaking uncontrollably. He knelt beside me, prying the pills from my hand, his own hands firm but gentle. Look at me, he said, his voice breaking. You are not alone in this. Not tonight. Not ever again. The dam broke. Sobs tore from me, raw and uncontrollable. I told him everything, every memory of abandonment, every moment of shame, every time I chose numbness over life. I expected him to recoil, to look at me with disgust. Instead, he pulled me into his arms and whispered, I'm not leaving. You hear me? I'm not leaving. When I finally calmed, he took my hands in his and looked into my eyes with a steadiness that made my breath catch. I know you're afraid. I know you don't believe you can be loved like this. But I love you. Not the mask you wear, not the silence you hide behind you. And if you'll let me, I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that you're worth more than all the pain you've carried. My heart stuttered. Daniel, you don't want this mess. You don't want me. The words spilled out, but he shook his head firmly. I lost the love of my life once. I thought God had finished my story, but then he brought me to you. I won't ignore that. I choose you, flaws, scars, battles and all. His voice wavered, but his conviction didn't. That night, in the quiet of my small apartment, Daniel asked me to marry him not with a ring, not with grandeur, but with a simple question born from love and faith. Let me fight for you, and let's fight together. My tears blurred everything, but this time they weren't from despair. For the first time in my life, I believed someone might actually stay. And I said yes. Months later, in a small, intimate ceremony surrounded by Daniel's family and a few friends, I stood at the altar with him. I had traded my pills for counseling, support, and a newfound faith. Not imposed, not forced, just discovered, gently. in the same quiet spaces where Daniel had first shown me God's love through his presence. I chose to be baptized into the Catholic faith, not as a symbol of perfection, but as a promise of hope. Today, when I look at Daniel across the breakfast table, laughter in his eyes, warmth in his smile, I marvel at the miracle of it all. My past is still part of me, but it no longer defines me. I am not abandoned. I am not broken. I am loved by a man who stayed, and by a God who never left, and that, more than anything, has taught me how to finally live. The path from numbness to love was not easy. It was jagged, filled with relapses, shame, and fear that I might always be defined by my brokenness. But life has a way of surprising us, especially when we whisper prayers we barely believe in. My whispered plea, God, if you're real, help me, was answered not with lightning or miracles, but with a man who simply refused to walk away. Sometimes love doesn't rescue you with grandeur. Sometimes it saves you quietly, step by fragile step. Today, I wake not with dread, but with gratitude. My mornings no longer begin with a bottle of pills, but with Daniel's smile and a deep breath of freedom. The shadows of my past still exist, but they no longer rule me. In their place, I've found something greater, hope. Hope rooted in love, in faith, in the gentle truth that healing is possible even for the most shattered hearts. If my story says anything, it's this: pain is not the end. No matter how deep the wounds, no matter how long the silence, there is always a door where light can slip in. For me, it was through Daniel's presence and through discovering a God who had never abandoned me. For you, it might come differently, but it will come, because love, true, faithful, enduring love, finds a way.